Good afternoon. My name is Joe Bandel, and I am the last Rosicrucian. Um, I'm doing, I'm trying to do weekly updates on what I sense is happening in terms of Gaia's ascension, and just kind of keep it real, I suppose. And sometimes I have a lot to talk about, and other days I don't have a lot to talk about. Well, today's one of those days where I don't really have a lot to talk about. We'll see how it goes, so I'm going to kind of freewheel it. I don't channel material like so many people channel material. However, I do function at will on the various planes, even the lower level planes like the etheric planes, stuff like that. And so I depend an awful lot on my own experiences of what's going on. And so I check it out for myself and what my interpretations are of what's going on. For example, the last two videos, I believe, the last two videos that I talked about how in 2025 this appears to be the third ascension wave that's beginning. And some people may kind of be raising their eyebrows at that, like, what's going on here? Nobody else is talking about a third wave of ascension. But this is this is my understanding. This is what I sense to be happening. Is I was on the first wave of ascension a couple of years ago. Um, the second wave just graduated. They just made their smashing graduation party, I suppose, right back in December and opening up for the going online for the changes that they've made. They're the ones that are currently fighting for the kind of world that they want. The and to even say, well, what about me? What's happening with me? It's kind of interesting because rather than continuing in a warrior type status, I seem to be more in kind of a placeholder where I'm kind of holding steady and keeping the vibrations in place. I'll give an example about a recent dream I had. In the recent dream, I was going around looking for something to do. And there was these other people that they had little jobs to do. They had these things to do and they were busy. And I'm like, I couldn't find anything that I was supposed to do. And I'm gonna just say that that's strange because my dream life has been extremely active, and I've always had things to do, maybe even kind of urgent things to do. So this having like a lucid dream, is where I'm going around and going like, what is it that I'm supposed to be doing? What, I can't find anything to do. And I thought about asking somebody, and I instantly got the knowledge, the impression that if I asked somebody, they'd give me something to do that was not what was right for me to do. It would be working under them. doing something that was wrong, I guess, wrong for me. In other words, as I came out of that dream and I tried to interpret what it meant, the closest interpretation that I could get to that dream was that I just had to be creative and find something that I was passionate about and do that. So it's kind of like I didn't have a road ahead. I didn't have a path ahead. I had kind of like run out of pre-scripted events and pre-scripted tasks. And now it was up to me to kind of creatively forge ahead in any way that I wanted, um, which was kind of a unique thing, which led to some further insight where one of my personal projects that I really wanted to do was I wanted to finish this science fiction metaphysical type trilogy that I had started and actually wrote the first book 25 years ago. And I really wanted to get back to that trilogy. However, one of the things in November, I determined I was going to, okay, I'm going to make a few changes to the first book and then dive into the second one. And I started that second book process, and it expanded just instantly way beyond where I was comfortable with. And I said, hey, I've got to just kind of sit back here and rethink this whole thing because it's going in a totally different direction than what I thought. I mean, it makes sense because when you're trying to hook up with something that you wrote 25 years ago, I've changed a lot. I've learned a lot in 25 years. And through a few more meditations and dreams that came out, I finally understood that, hey, like it or not, I'm going to have to go back and rewrite that first book. I've got to add more metaphysical, supernatural elements to it than what was in it previously, which ultimately would make it a lot more fascinating and interesting. But I'm just giving an example of, okay, here I am, and potentially other first waivers as, okay, what are we going to do? Well, it's up to us. We got to do that. Well, what about, okay, the second waivers who just kind of graduated and now they're 2025 is their first year of full empowerment out in the real world, so to speak, as opposed to working on their own inside stuff. And so they're energized, fully energized, and they're carving out their space. They're carving out their niche, and that's really powerful. Well, so what's the third wave then? The third wave is the wave that as our world falls apart, they're going like, "Oh shit, what's happening? I got to get my act together." That's so while the second wave is basically fully empowered and they're working on carving out their niche, the third wave is caught by surprise and they're going like, "Oh shit, I got to get my act together because this is not any fun anymore." And they're going to wake up, at least the ones that can wake up are gonna there's a big wake up call going on. So that's how I see the division of these energies happening. And I'm going to mention another dream that I just had. It was a few days ago, a few nights ago, whatever. Vision, dream vision, this kind of thing. The the dream was filled with there was all of these people. They were working individually, eh, collecting artifacts or collecting things for their own purposes. I know that sounds really weird, but imagine in your mind a social system, a social structure, or our social structure, and imagine it broke up, completely crumbled, collapsed, broke up into little fragments, a piece of here, a piece there, a piece here, that kind of thing. And so all there is a whole bunch of rubble, like, or a whole bunch of fragments. It reminded me of a secondhand store back when I was a boy, a young child, where I'd go into Nakbar's secondhand store and you could find all kinds of things. And that's what these people were doing. They were individually, they were kind of searching around, like almost in a secondhand store, or maybe like a uh, outdoor yard sale, or one of those kind of things where you just kind of pick through things. You look for bargains, and you everything's used, but some of it might be perfectly functioning. Some of it might need a little repair, uh, but it's worth keeping. And so you have all these people, and they're kind of picking through chunks or fragments or articles of used things, trying to find something that they want to keep, that they want to use, that they want to put together. They want to put it back together to form something else. So this whole dream was about two things. One was the collapse, where everything kind of fell apart, and the other thing is where each of these individuals are going through all that rubble, if you will, like a flea market or something. And so I'm going to get one. I'm going to get this, and over here I'm going to get that. So it's not it's not creating something new, but it's sifting through or picking through, as individuals, picking through some of these things and finding, okay, what's worth keeping and what's worth giving, what's worth, or what's to just drop, to throw away. That's what the dream was. And that, to me, is an indicator of what the year 2025 is going to be about. It's going to be about what are we as a collective, what are we going to be holding on to and keeping, and what are we going to be throwing away. So that is powerful. It's a powerful. It represents a powerful change in our society structure too. So when you talk about an energy, like what's the energy for this week or that kind of thing, this is what I was getting at. Okay, it's broke. The whole system's broke. The whole global system, the power structure is broke energetically. There's a lot of pieces, and what's happening is people are going to be kind of sifting through it. Let's throw this away, let's keep this. If you find that happening in your own life, that would not surprise me, because that's what a lot of the third wave is going to be forced to do, because there's going to be plenty of challenges here. Now, in terms of like the energy update, that's all that I have to say. However, the sense that I have is that this each one of these waves that hits is an activation of different vibrations, higher vibrations that are coming in and that are bringing things into awareness. And I am really getting the sense that, well, on a lot of my previous videos, I've been kind of putting out that there's probably that I really think there's going to be uh, extraterrestrial contact of some kind that's really in the process of happening. In other words, we as a civilization, as a global civilization, are going to be, one way or another, confronting the idea that we're not alone in this universe. And that as Gaia's vibrations continue to increase or solidify, crystallize, actually she's already where she needs to be, but as our individual vibrations begin to continue to rise and to crystallize, uh, the veil is getting thinner and thinner, and we are going to be seeing more and more uh, what we would consider unusual, even to the point of maybe seeming supernatural phenomenon that isn't really supernatural but is going to become the new norm. And I've mentioned that with the uh, Galactic Federation type thing, or UFOs, alien contact that way. So I've mentioned that, and I'm thinking that that's going to become increasingly a power factor in this year of 2025. But I'm going to bring up the other end of it, which it just it was brought up. There was a YouTube video that I was just watching today that was talking about um, children with autism that couldn't speak, and that apparently were telepathic. They had telepathy. They had a mind meld or a mind bond with, for example, with their parents or something like that. It's fascinating material because it's talking about children that we almost give up on, and this research finding out that they have gifts that we don't have, and being like true telepaths. And there is some real fascinating videos and information out there dealing with that. It's kind of, one of my grandchildren is autistic, and she can't talk. And I've when I was visiting them last winter about this time, I got a chance to be with her a little bit and to find out a little more about her, whatever. And her parents uh, make use of tablets for her to uh, say what she wants to say and type it out because she can't speak it particularly, and doing a lot of things like that. And I realized that in certain things she's absolutely brilliant at. She's appears to be really, really brilliant and creative at pattern recognition, among other things. And I'm not going to get any further than that, other than saying, okay, here it's a child that really has some tough problems in getting along in life or whatever, but also has some real gifts. And I'm speaking of this in terms of the video I was seeing where they were doing tests with uh, some of these children on their psychic abilities, and they were getting almost like 100%. They were way in their 90s of 95% or whatever of being able to psychically receive certain types of information. And there is enough of them. And what's happening is a small group of scientists are really, really interested in exploring what's what makes these children different and what's really happening. And whereas the greater number of scientists or whatever, they're just uh, poo-pooing the whole thing. But the main point that I'm getting at is they more and more children are being born with gifts. Right now, it might the preponderance of children with these gifts may have autistic issues, but there's ones that are born that are being gifted that don't, and there's more that are born having gifts like uh, perfect recall of past lives. I mean, if you took a day or two and started going through the internet and trying to track down uh, gifted children that are being born today, yeah, you'd find some really fascinating things that are happening. So, what the point of all this that I'm getting at is, okay, on the one side, on the one hand, with the veil thinning, we're having quote extraterrestrial contact. These are beings from maybe other dimensions or something like that, because we're talking about multidimensional realities all of a sudden. While at the same time, there's this section of science or the materialists who strongly believe there's nothing out there except the material world. Everything else is uh, imagination or not real or something like that. And what's happening is the evidence is building up that, hey, there's so called non physical entities. And what makes us aware, our consciousness, is also a non physical, the soul is non physical. And that our physical body is an instrument that the soul inhabits for a while. And if there are genetic problems with our physical body, there's certain things that don't work so well, that don't get through, but the core essence, our soul, our non physical essence, is not impaired like our physical one is. Because this is one of the things they're finding out working with these autism autistic children is they're being able to tap into some incredible sources of uh, wisdom or intelligence or something like that. For example, and I'm just randomly saying something that I remembered with this one, uh, two children were coming up with prime numbers being numbers that are not divisible by anything. And one would take their turn, and the next would take a turn, and the next would take a turn. And they were getting up into 6 digit numbers where they could put out a prime number. I mean, it's even like it boggles my mind even to think about how you would even how or why someone would have something like that. But so I'm just giving that as an example. But I'm also bringing up something that is not so ordinary, but I think is happening more and more and more also, which is uh, contact with the dead or the souls that are in the process of the dead and dying, the crossing over period. I personally have experienced uh, some very uncomfortable situations where there was a soul, an entity that had passed on, and being helping them to the light, helping them return to the light. I've also had some very disturbing experiences. One in which my wife's mother was on her deathbed, and my wife and I were a few miles away from where she was at the hospital, where suddenly my wife was attacked and her mother's spirit took possession over her body to the point where my wife started talking with the same lisp that her mother had from a stroke, and was had a disability in walking the same way that her mother did. And I had to get rid of the spirit of her mother out of my wife that way. I mean, this is a creepy situation. You could say, okay, that's kind of weird or whatever, but that was something that happened to my wife, and she described what was happening in her own words. When my wife's father died, there was about 6 of us in the same room, and the moment of his death, his spirit tried to take over me. I could feel it, and I had to physically hold it at arm's length while I called in for some help, some light beings, angels, whatever you want to say, to help them and take them. Because that spirit was very afraid and wanted to get into a physical body desperately wanted to get into a physical body, any physical body, which those two instances bring up to me an issue that nobody seems to be talking about. And the issue is, okay, if this happened to my wife, if this happened to me, where somebody is dying, is in the process of dying, and they decide to latch on, take possession, or latch on to a nearby living person, that must be something that happens quite a bit. That's what I'm thinking. I will say there was I can speak of another time when I was working with a family whose teenage son was a troubled teenager, and when I psychically tried to investigate the the situation, the conditions, I found that there was an entity that was attached to that young boy. And when I tried to remove it, it was a ghost. It was a deceased spirit. And I found later that it was because when you dislodge, when you encounter a ghost, a lot of times what happens is you vividly relive the moment of their death or the instance of their death, because that's actually because you've actually come into true contact with that person. It's a very uncomfortable experience. And I found out the the truth of how this one entity, this one boy, the spirit of this one boy, young boy, had died. And it turned out that the boy who had died was like a best friend of the boy that I was working with, and had been over at his home and was found uh, hanging from his neck in the bathtub. He'd strangled himself. Was playing what they called the game among teenagers, where you take strangulation to make an orgasm more vivid and more powerful. And he'd apparently blacked out and uh, died. And because there is always the question, well, did he commit suicide or was this an accident? And the point is that in the process of trying to uh, investigate this psychically and find out the truth for myself, and removing that entity, removing that spirit from that of the boy that I was working with, I had to realize that it was an accidental death. And the boy that I was working with was the boy that found his friend hanging there dead. And there's an example of a, a recently dying or dead entity latching on to a living person. And I can't help but think about all the nursing homes out there, the hospitals, any place where people are dying, and where the people who are dying are frightened, and their spirit latches on to somebody, just like the three examples that I had experienced myself, one on myself, one on my wife, and the one with this boy. It's like there's got to be a lot of them out there. And then so the question is, okay, how many people, and I'm going to leave you with this question because this video is long enough. But the question is, okay, think to a funeral, think to someone who you know, or someone you know has died. And if someone close to that person has had almost a total personality change after the death of the person. In other words, I guess what I'm saying is, did the dead person take over the personality? Did it literally take over that somebody else's body, and that person is totally changed after the death of whoever? Because I've heard of a lot of people, they totally changed. They became like a different person after somebody died. And I'm wondering if this is part of what happened. And people can talk about possession, things like that. The thing is, okay, channeling. Look at all the channeling out there. What channeling is actually taking temporary possession of a person's body as well. So we're getting into what a lot of people would think is woo woo or kind of Twilight Zone stuff. However, as the vibrations rise, the veil gets thinner and thinner, and we're going to be seeing a lot more of the interaction with uh, the dead and the dying. That's, I think, also part of my projection for this coming year, and how there's going to be a wake up call, and a renewed interest in the supernatural. Anyway, hope you find this of interest. Thank you. Till next week. Bye.